Okay, Eric, we're going to get started. Everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I'm Matt Wiggins. I'm the Associate VP of Economic Vitality for the Boulder Chamber. We want to thank you for being with us today. As you can imagine, we've heard a lot of discussion around tariffs, supply chain, everything that's, all of this information coming from after COVID. Supply chain was a huge issue, and even more so with our new administration. In response to that, we've partnered up with our friend Eric Edwards, who's on the call today. Eric is with the Rocky Mountain Global Trade, which is also part of the Supply Chain Collective. And the Boulder Chamber has partnered with the Supply Chain Collective to provide a number of resources for our membership and other community partners for export resources, such as certificate of origin, certificate of sales, GMP certifications, and we'll be sharing more about those resources in today's call and towards the end of the webinar. And for future reference, we'll be sharing links and everything in the chat. Eric's going to walk through today's presentation talking about specific tariffs, what to be on the lookout for, what strategies you should be looking at as businesses. As we walk through today's presentations, please use the Q&A section of the Zoom call to ask questions. We do have some time at the end of today's call to answer those questions. But if we have a critical mass of questions around one single topic, we will pause and address those questions in real time. So be sure to use the Q&A portion of the Zoom call. Yes. And at the end, we will have some more resources. And as Eric said, we're going to be sharing those resources out to all the attendees. We'll be posting this information to our website. We are recording today's call. And so we'll have the webinar also online on our YouTube channel. So without further ado, I want to introduce Eric Edwards of Rocky Mountain Global Trade and the Supply Chain Collective. Eric, take us away. We have a lot to get to.
Cool. Thank you for having me. And then just to kind of set the table for everyone a little bit today, where we're talking tariffs, this is more to talk about the what in the how. So let's talk the mechanics a little bit more as far as what these tariffs are. Kind of want to avoid talking about the why. I know there is a lot of emotion wrapped up into this as well on the why and the impacts. They're here. We know that we have to deal with them. So let's talk a little bit more how that looks like. How are these things structured? And then as we kind of have a little bit of a baseline of understanding what that is, then what does that mean as far as how we can actually manage these as we go forward? Kind of laying this out to keep this light, tight, and bright as we go through in only 1 hour's time. Want to kind of set the table a little bit with some basic import terminology. As we said at the beginning, I think we have over 100 people on here, and that probably means we have a very broad background of understanding within what customs is and terminology. So we'll just kind of start with a light stretching exercise on terminology before we get into the meat of what are all of these tariffs, kind of running through on an overview of what that looks like, and then running a little bit on each one of these as we have it. The news cycle has everything right now. Everyone just keeps getting wrapped up on the branches and the latest and greatest tree that's out there. Trying to bring this in on the overview of what does this look like for the forest of all of it. So we'll start there, start talking through all the trees that are in the forest. And then there's some additional items to just kind of watch out that just kind of play in with this as well. And then we can get into talking about some of the mitigation strategies and kind of what we've been seeing from some of our other customers. So for terminology, kind of kick it off, laid out a lot of the primary stuff that we're going to be talking about today on what is a harmonized tariff. So an NHTS, that's big Bible of everything that imports into the US. There is a 10-digit classification for that item that when coupled with the next item on there, a country of origin, this is where this item is actually made, not where it ships from, not where you purchase it from, but where it's made. So if you combine that with your HTS, you actually get to what that customs duty is. That's our base duty. Traditionally, feels very antiquated at this point in time. Most companies, this has been an average of anywhere from free to 3 to 5%. If you have anything in clothing, footwear, that can get up in 20 to 30%, but most of the time that average has been 3 to 5%. Then we get into the tariffs. This is more a protectionist item. I think everyone's kind of aware of that at this point in the news, but trying to differentiate between what that customs duty is and what a customs tariff is, why they arrive at where they are. The other item that for all of us as we're having these discussions is the importer of record. This is the legal entity that is required to actually, you're responsible for all the requirements to import this into the US. This is typically the owner or the purchaser of the goods, but contrary to what you hear in the news, I think there's a lot of us that we understand. The fact is, this importer record has to be in the US. So this is a US company that is providing the HTS, stating what the country of origin is, and paying the duty and tariffs on all of this stuff. There's a couple other items in here for later on if people want to refer back to on what is customs drawback, what is a foreign trade zone, a customs bond, and then I put the trade remedy stuff down here as well. For the most part, I don't really want to spend a lot of time on what is a trade remedy, 232, IEEPA 301. It's here if people really want to know what that is for the authority. End of the day, that authority is what is it putting us into the mechanics of stuff here right now. As I said, we will be distributing this out. So for people, my thought is you can use these as note cards. This is just a good reference for people if you want one handy dandy one-sheeter on basic terminology that you can refer back to. With that, kind of put this back to, let's just stress, subject to change. And I see that we have a comment on there on 232 for pharmaceuticals as well. Don't have as much on here just yet because it's just been discussed. We don't have enough details on it, but that's subject to change. This sheet here is accurate as of yesterday morning, trying to keep it as up to date as I could, but that's yesterday morning. There's a couple other items in here that I saw that came out last night. But my thought was, again, we're getting wrapped up in the news cycle of everything that's coming out. Let's take a pause. Let's bring this back up and let's look at what is the complete forest of everything that's out there on all of these tariffs. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact either that customs duty is the first item up here. This is the traditional bedrock of everything that comes into the US. So that 3 to 5% average, that's where everything's always kind of started from on our mitigation strategies that we talk about later on. Let's not forget about our good friend, the Section 301 tariffs. These are the Trump 1.0 tariffs on China. As much as everyone talks about reciprocal and steel and everything else, you don't hear as much about 301, but this is still out there. And as I kind of put some of the bullets on here, this is the average rate that's out there of 25%. It can be 7.5%. I have it out there in the notes as we get in this later on. Could go all the way up to 100% on some of these 301 tariffs. We'll talk about the fentanyl. I have this as just one line to keep it easy right now, because really the only one that's out there is the Chinese one for fentanyl. And to stress, it's called IEEPA fentanyl just because customs, when they refer to this and they're telling everyone in the industry on how you have to report this in, they refer to this as the fentanyl tariff. So I'm just going to use their terminology to keep things straight for us. I do have comments over there as well that Mexico and Canada, if everyone recalls the good old days in February when everything launched out, that Mexico and Canada had a similar one, but that had some modifications to it. I have a separate slide on that as well. We're going to start with the reciprocal. This is not in calendar order how everything came through. It's easier to think of it this way as we break everything down. I am very fortunate in the fact that if we're talking tariffs, they did at least break this down to 10%. So this makes this a one-liner on here compared to having all of the variety of tariffs on country by country on here. There is a comment over there too, if you're using this as a sheet later on. China is 125%. And then as I broke everything down as we go across as well, that you have your tariff. What is this eligible for? Is drawback eligible? Is there a US content component to it? Is USMCA part of this calculation in the tariff? There's two different things that come into play on foreign trade zones, so I try to break that down, and then also on de minimis. So on the reciprocal tariffs, this is a good example on there of, what's in, what's out. And again, at a high level, when we're trying to figure out what can we do, what can't we do, this comes down to, as we start talking mitigation later on, of which of the tariffs are applicable, and then as it's applicable, what is available for tools in that toolbox to try to manage this. And then just kind of going down the list a little bit more, steel, aluminum, auto, talking a little bit about what those are. We'll get into that later on in a couple of these other slides. I do have in here as well Venezuelan oil. It's really three degrees of Venezuelan oil. It's been announced. There's not a lot of details out there. They said that the Secretary of State is supposed to make a decision and announce who they're going to apply this on. But as people are trying to figure out what is my total tariff burden, keep this in mind down the road that this seems to be the wild card that's out there. Uh, I will, before we move on as well, I kind of like this slide for people as a format that if you're trying to figure out, as we talk later on, stackable tariffs, this gives you a way that you can go back and say, well, if it's a stackable tariff, what on average does this mean for me? If we look at country of origin, China, we have a 301 tariff, you have fentanyl. Reciprocal for China, we would have to look at the comments is 125%. Start adding that up, that's 25 plus 20 plus 125. And then if you have Venezuelan oil actually get put on China, you can add that on as well. But this way, it gives you a quick and dirty sheet that I think you can just refer back to when you're having discussions at a high level. Let's kind of move on, breaking it down. Like my thought was as we go through these slides for people, like I said, I know we have a bit of a broad background for everyone, but I wanted to put this in a format that if we distribute this out for the audience, you can use this as note cards. It's a nice kind of easy format that what is my critical items up at the top? What do I need to keep in mind? A little bit of the overview, what are the rates, and some history that kind of goes with it. And as we said, it's all subject to change. So I do have up on as we go across this for some of the dates. 301 is a little bit older and been established, so it's not modified as quickly as some of these other ones. But over on the far right, I did kind of put a paused section because a couple of these, they come in, they go out, they get paused. As of this moment, as of yesterday morning when I made it, this was not paused. But if you're using this to kind of help keep track of stuff later on and using this as a format, I think that's a good one to keep in mind as we go. But the 301 tariffs, for the most part, I think everyone's kind of familiar with it. I put the lists down there. These are the traditional lists from when they rolled out from Trump 1.0. I do want to call out in the rate section, though, to keep in mind I don't know if people noticed this as much because it was on the tail end of the election and before Trump came into office, but they did make some new announcements on this that we're all used to the 7.5, the traditional 25%, but they did add 50% on semiconductors, solar cells, and syringes as an example. They also made it 100% on electric vehicles, looking at those Chinese vehicles coming into the US. The reason I call this out is earlier this week, when they put out the announcement from the Trump administration that China is subject to 245% tariff. We all wondered, where did 245% come from? They did finally clarify it's that 100% on electric vehicles and 301 that helped push that total up on what the stackable is. So as much as I think we're familiar with 7.5 to 25%, let's keep in mind there's still some other modifications that were out there, and it's again getting lost in the news cycle. Like I said, that one I think everyone's kind of familiar with, but starting in on some of our new ones in is just a high level again. The fentanyl tariff, this one came out in March and rapidly was adjusted going up from 10 to 20%. Again, trying to keep this in a format that if they modify it, it's easy to kind of keep track of what is it on which tariff, what is getting modified and why. This one, for the most part, they haven't touched in any of the news cycles that we've seen. It's 20% on all Chinese origin items. It was originally 10%, and then they ratcheted that up. I think if we think of it in terms of the escalating trade war right now, it's almost like the fentanyl one's kind of forgotten about, and it's just stayed at the 20%. The reciprocal is the one that they keep playing with, and they just keep ratcheting that up for their discussions with China. But keeping this right now, let's not forget that it's out there. I think the hard part with this one is that they said this one is until the flow of fentanyl is stopped from coming into the US. I have not heard much from the administration out there as far as talking about fentanyl. It's just turned into a trade war, but it doesn't seem that there is a venue to actually have this ratchet back. So as we're talking about what's in, what's out, how long are these here for, this one, at least on the surface from when they're talking about stopping the flow of fentanyl coming in, it's a little loose. So this one seems like it's going to be in for a while. fentanyl, Canada and Mexico. This one was back in the beginning of February. They put a pause on this. It's back in from March. And this is the one where everything kind of started up where we could see where things are going at this point in time. USMCA, this was the big crown jewel of all the agreements that Trump had in Trump 1.0 is USMCA. I think this one kind of reminded the administration that this is something that they negotiated with Canada and Mexico. All of the auto parts companies were the big one, I think, that got this pushed through where they said, look, as much as the tariffs are there, what about USMCA? So they did make allowances on this back in March, where if it's USMCA compliant, your goods are duty free. If you're not USMCA compliant, then you have 25% on goods, 10% on energy and potash. And then in case this IEEPA fentanyl goes away, they also did put an item out here where they're saying all others would be subject to a 12% reciprocal tariff. So to keep in mind, if this thing modifies, there is a 12% that comes into play down the road on that. Now, I'm going to take a quick pause when we're talking through on this one alone, just because USMCA, where it comes up, this is an allowance to get out there on a duty-free, kind of a duty-free category that for most companies in USMCA, if your items were already duty-free, there wasn't a lot of point in actually claiming USMCA. Why would you go through the extra work and do the administrative burden? And if you do that administrative burden at that point in time, you just have something else for customs to go poke at, and you have a new risk area that you have to manage from US Customs. But now that they're allowing USMCA compliant goods to come in duty-free on this tariff, in its 25%, it's something to keep in mind as a company where if you haven't really been doing USMCA, this is a good incentive that you really want to be doing USMCA and ramping that up. It is a big shift, I would think, at that point in time from what we have been doing, like I said, from a risk-based perspective, that risk has now changed. When you're talking 3 to 5% to 0%, now we're talking 25%. The reason we kind of shift on reciprocal tariffs at this point in time is it's easier to talk about. We have a lot of if this, then that activity that's out there. A lot of these tariffs, as they've been putting it in, going to call out up top there too, is they do not allow, a lot of the other tariffs have not been allowing drawback. This one does allow drawback. It does make some statements around what you can do in FTZ. It is still stackable. But as we go through on this reciprocal tariff, I think this is the one everyone knows in the news. It had all sorts of varying rates country by country. Luckily, they did break this down to the 10%, so it's easier to just understand and manage this as a uniform 10% tariff. The one item down here in the exceptions, the reason why I start this one off before we get into the 232s is it is reciprocal tariff or 232 tariff. In those 232 tariffs, we'll talk about a little bit down the road. That's auto and auto parts, steel, aluminum, and their derivatives, or any future 232 tariffs. So as we had a question earlier on pharmaceuticals, they left this open that in case they open up something on a 232 tariff on pharmaceuticals, it again is also a reciprocal tariff or that 232 on the pharmaceuticals. For drawback, I did see there was a question in here. So just to clarify on drawback, there is a program within US Customs. If you import materials into the US, you pay duty and tariff on that, and then you subsequently export that same item out of the US, you can claim to get a refund on that duty and tariff that you paid. So you import it in, you export it out. Because you did an export, they let you claim that back. Now, the Trump administration felt like on their first go around, they let too much go as far as these tariffs were concerned. So when they came out the gates, a lot of these tariffs, they said no drawback is allowed. It's a big deal when you're bringing stuff into the US for a variety of reasons, valid business reasons, and exporting it back out. This hurts because you can no longer claim to get that money back. So it comes into the US, you're just going to pay it. There's no way to get that back onto that program. Now, it's interesting, reciprocal was a deviation when they announced this, that they actually do allow drawback. So it's a big notice on this one. So if you have reciprocal, you can't get drawback. As we go through in the 232s down the road, you'll see that that's handled a little bit differently. The other item that's in here for reciprocal for companies to keep in mind as well, they do make an allowance on US value in this from a component aspect. So they say if you have 20% US content as a bottom threshold, 20% or more, at that point, you can now claim that you're only going to pay the tariff on the non-US content. So if you have 20% US, 80% foreign, you can pay the tariff on the 80% foreign value alone. So it's good in the sense that you can reduce your tariff rate on this. It does mean that you're going to have more administrative burden in how you actually calculate that. The other item that was recently announced is they had an exemption for electronic articles. We're going to call that out under an annex. It's, again, HTS driven. There's a list of HTS codes for electronics, computers, smartphones, monitors, etc., that are exempted out of this, which is good. It was nice that they announced that in the morning. By that afternoon, they announced that they're probably going to be doing other tariffs on top of electronics anyways for semiconductors and whatnot. And again, that's why I go back to on that original sheet of keeping track of what's in, what's out, and keeping track of which ones apply. Again, the reciprocal 10% right now. If you are still importing from China, this is the one that has the big kicker on it. 125% on China as of yesterday morning. I haven't seen anything else in the news, but that big one on China still remains. And then keep in mind for everyone on this, it has been paused for 90 days. I did put the dates in here because it's nice to hear 90 days. Where is that line in the sand? That is July 9th. So we have 90 days to start gathering together all of our information to be ready to go on what happens in 90 days and really understand what that impact might be. Steel and steel derivatives. So kind of starting with this one off the 232s. As we said, either you're going to have a reciprocal tariff or you get into the 232s. It's either or. This is the one where it starts getting a little bit more complicated. And as we talked about earlier, this one has no allowance for drawback. So if it comes into the US, you will pay that tariff. If you put it through a foreign trade zone, that privileged foreign status basically means if you put it in a foreign trade zone, this is a status where you will pay the tariff as well. There's no getting out of paying this tariff. Unless, in that exception that they have, you have some sort of US value in this that's coming in. Again, it's all, as the administration's been saying, everything in the US. You don't want these tariffs, make it in the US. If you don't want the tariffs and you're going to import it from somewhere else, make sure that there's some sort of US content to it, and then you can get out of the tariff. So that's kind of how that box lays out up top. This one, it starts getting in the interesting one between steel and aluminum on what they're asking. They've kind of had this out there already, but when you're importing in steel and steel derivatives, they also want to know the melt and pour on this one. Where did the steel originate from? So as much as you might have a country of origin item, say it is country of origin Korea, that's where this item was made. They want to know the melt and pour of steel, where that came from. That could be potentially China. So you're going to be reporting Korea as far as your country of origin. You'll be reporting China for the melt and pour. That melt and pour does not at the moment impact anything else on the tariff rate. It is a reporting item. Now, this is where things start getting complicated and I'll kind of call out later on down the road that we are asking if people want additional webinars. Steel and aluminum can probably be their own webinar in and of themselves, because when you look at the rates, it's very HTS driven. They have 25% if you're in chapters 72 and 73 of the HTS. This is the high level in what they have, but they have all of these variety of annexes with HTS codes of what's in, what's out. So 72, 73, it's 25% on the total value. The next one down is if you are outside of chapter 73, this would be more that derivative item. So it's a manufactured item that contains steel. Then you only pay 25% on the declared value of the steel itself. So that is a downstream machined item that contains steel. it gets a little difficult in how you would declare that and everything else. And again, these derivatives are very HTS driven. So as much as we say outside Chapter 73, this could be very specific as far as the list of HTS codes. If you're not in that list of those HTS codes for derivatives, then that means you're going to fall back to a reciprocal tariff at that point in time. If you don't know how to calculate the value of that steel content, we just keep going down. If this, then that. If this, then that. So item C in here, if you don't know how to derive at the declared value of that steel content, then you're going to pay 25% on the full value. Now, as we go through this, 25% on the value, if you're in this list of HTS codes. If you don't know how to calculate the value, you back up to 25%. As we said at the earlier part of this, the exception is 0%. If your iron and steel for that melt and pour was US origin. It's very HTS dependent, again, like I said, but if you do get this out of the US for the base steel that's being made elsewhere, then this is 0%. Again, you can see how this gets a little bit more complicated. I will say this is as high level as I can kind of keep it for this audience to keep it within time. If you do want to talk more on steel, I'm going to transition to aluminum here in just a second. Like I said, both of these, we would love to hear feedback if you want to talk more in depth on this. These could be an hour alone in and of themselves as we go through it. Aluminum and aluminum derivatives, very similar to what we were just talking about on the Section 232s for steel. They do have a US value component in this as well. That kind of get it out of jail free card of duty free on it. Again, no drawback. If you put it through an FTZ, you're going to have to pay full freight on this thing. So you will be paying that as it goes through. They do have a smelt and cast reporting. So they want to know what that country origin is of the actual aluminum itself. Country origin of your item. Where is the origin of the actual metal itself that comes out? There is a little bit of a call out on this as we go through for a difference on that rate, though, that one of the major suppliers globally of aluminum is Russia. If you call out Russia, that is the one instance where you will be paying 200% duty on this because that origin is Russian. They are a sanctioned country and they are applying it as such. For those of us in the trade world, I think everyone kind of saw this in the news originally when they put this out on aluminum. If you did not know the origin of your smelt and cast of the aluminum, customs originally said you should actually claim Russia and pay that 200%. And then when you figure out what that origin is of the smelt and cast, then you go have it corrected and ask for a refund. That lasted for about, I want to say, a week or so. Industry actually went back on them very fiercely, and they since amended that where you can say other and not actually be forced as a best practice to claim Russia. So that has changed, thankfully. But be aware if it does come up, that 200% comes into play. Again, very HTS driven. I do want to say it is very HTS driven, and it's not by description on here. The other item that came out in the same day as the derivatives, the same day as the reciprocal when that came out, was they've expanded the aluminum derivatives to include beer. Not beer in cans, but beer and cans. So if you're importing beer, you're now captured as an aluminum derivative. As I said, HTS codes are one of the key items to have to pay attention to. Don't just go off the description of your goods. Make sure you have your HTS codes very locked in as a company and be tracking that as well as you're going through. Auto and auto parts. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. Again, it's a Section 232 that's out there. The autos are pretty straightforward. Again, USMCA, where they have an allowance for that. Again, I think everyone's kind of seen in the news, most of your cars, they go through between Canada, the US, and Mexico multiple times in multiple iterations until you get to a finished product. So they do allow for that. There is some stuff out there on the auto parts. I will confess to the fact that I have not had much time to dive into the auto parts, so I can't really speak too much in depth on it. It's also a good call out that auto parts is one of those good items. as all this stuff is rolling out, they are implementing these tariffs before they give guidance to the industry on how to actually implement this from an actual technical perspective. There are FAQs typically out there on Customs website. They have kind of degraded as far as how useful those are. And auto parts is kind of one of those where the FAQs has not been very helpful. And they stated where that auto parts, they're going to be doing something May 3rd. It just does not look like there's been a lot of details out there just yet. If there are specific questions on auto parts, let me know. I'm happy to go dive into that a little bit more for you to help you out. The last one in here as we're going through Venezuelan oil, it's like I said earlier, this is 3 shades of Venezuelan oil. They have decided that instead of doing sanctions, there's so many sanctions out there, let's take a pivot. Let's try secondary tariffs. Tariffs work. If we do secondary tariffs on Venezuelan oil, maybe we get better traction from what we're trying to accomplish as a nation on punishing Venezuela for a variety of offenses. They announced this out there. This comes down to a lot of different secretaries have to come together. The Secretary of Commerce in consultation with State and Treasury and Homeland Security will determine at their discretion how they want to apply this. They haven't stated anything just yet. So we know there's this 25% that's just kind of floating out there to be applied. If I was a betting man, I would still think that they're going to apply this on China. The only clarification they gave to countries was if this gets applied to China at their discretion, it will be China, Hong Kong, and Macau. So that clarification was in there, even though they did not state that it will be on China. It's kind of a watch out item, but again, this is as much as I kind of saw that was out there for an update on it. Kind of as a wrap up as we transition from this right now, I think the biggest thing as we go through this on all of these tariffs is HTS classification is one of the critical items as we go through it. We'll talk about that a little bit more mitigation, but you really have to know your HTS classification to understand what those impacts are. What tariff is in, what tariff is out, how does that stack on what that burden is? And part of the reason why I talk about the stackable tariff impact is I do want to have a practical moment here to talk with people that if you are importing in the US, you have to have a customs bond to import. And I will stress that you have to have the bond. Putting in here how that bond is calculated, though, is duties, taxes, fees times 10% is the amount of the bond that you have to have. As these tariffs continue to ratchet up and go upwards, and especially on China, how they stack up, where you can get up there around 190% on some of this stuff, and you can kind of see in the graphs, it means your bond may not be sufficient. So you don't have enough in your policy that says that to customs, I am importing and I will guarantee that I can pay you everything that I owe you. So if your bond is not sufficient at that point, you cannot import. It's a kind of a gating item that I think kind of gets overlooked as we're talking through the tariffs. I did put a call out in here. You know, I am not paid by TRG in any way, shape, or form, but I have always used TRG in my past life at Fortune 50 companies, smaller companies everywhere else. They are one of the best values as far as the bonds. They're one of the most responsive looking out for you, and they do have automated bond sufficiency reporting. The reason I say that is it's nice to have that automated sufficiency reporting because if you don't have time to keep track of this, let that run in the background for you and pop up and remind you that, hey, you might have something coming up that you have to take a look at. I did put their contacts down there. Feel free to reach out to them more. They are more the experts on the customs bond. But again, as these tariffs go up, this is a gating item to import, and it becomes a critical item for you to in order to even still continue to import as this racks up on you. Put another slide out there on de minimis changes. This one, if you're in the e-commerce space, this is the big one. Everyone talks about de minimis and it sounds cool. Try to put down here a little bit on an overview and a little bit more in layman's terms of what that is. They have very specifically been attacking this. Before the Trump administration came in, there was a lot of bipartisan push already to try to close this loophole. Anything that is under $800 in shipment value to one person per day is allowed to come in essentially as an exception to a customs entry. So you did not have to pay 301 tariffs, you didn't have to pay duty. You weren't making any other declarations as far as, FDA, FTC, are these drugs that are coming in. And as we've heard, fentanyl comes in under de minimis. It is a concern for what's coming in all these packages. There was a bipartisan push trying to get this through. This really ratcheted up under the Trump administration, where they are closing this loophole. As part of the trade war that we're in right now, they specifically said the vast majority of this de minimis comes out of China. They are closing that loophole. I do want to point out that this will be huge on the e-commerce side, but it's also worth kind of keeping an eye on as we go forward. They tried closing this back in February. They closed it February 4th. They opened it back up in February 5th in one day. The reason it opened back up in one day, just for facts down there to keep an eye on, there's typically 200,000 customs entries a day. Every day, 200,000 entries. There are 4 million de minimis shipments every day. China is the vast majority of that. When they talk about closing this de minimis loophole, Commerce has to say that they have systems in place that they can actually manage this. And apparently, back in February, they did not have the systems in place to actually manage this, and it was just melting down everything coming into the US. So they let that come back through. We don't really know if they made any progress or not. We do know that they are very adamant that they want to close this May 2nd. So this is an item to watch as this comes up, that all of these direct shipments that have been coming in, especially in the e-commerce space, will all of a sudden have to have a true compliance program, because they will be doing this the same as everyone else has under actual formal customs entry. From a company perspective, I do want to say as a watch out as well, even if you're not in the e-commerce space, that amount of volume that starts backing up US Customs, ports, flights, you name it, will have an impact on some sort of impact on your transportation. So it's something to keep in mind if you haven't thought about it, and just kind of look ahead and see what that might mean for your business. Happy to come in. Our team can actually talk through this a little bit with you as well if you want to do some scenario planning and options with that. Other news is we're kind of getting into some of the different mitigation items. As we're going through, this is a little bit more just a reminder on some things that are out there. Increased customs compliance. As we've been talking through this, these tariff amounts are huge. There is a lot of chatter out there that everyone is hearing, especially in my space, on if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. On what should we be using for an HTS classification? What can we do for country of origin? You name it. As an example, I've heard in a past life where on med device, they would use sterility. Wherever we sterilize this item is where our country of origin is going to be. We can use that, right? We did this in the past. And no, sterility, as we look in the regulations, has zero impact on country of origin determination. It's like saying I bought my iPhone and wherever I charged it originally is where my country of origin is going to be. Customs says no. Your iPhone is wherever it was made. It's an iPhone. Sterility and that electricity has no bearing on that. So there's a lot of stuff that's out there. If people are not being accurate in what they're reporting, they did come out. They had the Deputy Assistant Attorney General back in February in the conference say that they will be coming and utilizing False Claims Act for the enforcement even more going forward. And this is specifically on classification, country of origin, valuation. They will be looking for you. There is no allowance for first-time offenses. We used to go and try to mitigate. They don't want to do that. They're just going to come at you for straight fraud. That's where they're coming from on it. In that, they're looking for at least 3 times the value of the money that was withheld. So whatever they think that you did not pay, they're going to come at you for 3 times of that, plus additional penalties. So while we talk about customs looking for you, the last item on here for people to keep in mind as well that I think kind of gets overlooked. I've been brought in at other companies before because they got caught due to a whistleblower. Whistleblowers went and they told the authorities and said, hey, something is not kosher here, something is not right. They can receive a portion of that penalty recovery. As these as these tariff amounts go up, you think about what this means from an enforcement perspective. So that amount really helps whistleblowers as far as, hey, calling out, if I'm going to get 30% of this and we're not doing it right, nothing holding me back from calling this out from the company. That's a good payday. There is a lot out there as well on Chinese exporters. I did see a comment on that where, let's just be honest. Again, we have a lot going on with Chinese suppliers, exporters, you name it. People use a lot of the Chinese freight forwarders as well. There's a lot of stuff in the news out there where they're offering to reduce the stated value on your commercial invoice. They're offering to kind of play around a little bit on your HTS code. I mean, a lot of the stuff, it's if it sounds too good, if it sounds too good to be true, it's not. If you are the importer of record on this and you're getting this guidance, you are on the hook. And again, 3 times the value where they're coming at you, short-term gain for a long-term pain is probably not worth it. And there is a lot out there on the, like I said, on the Chinese front where they're just trying to find ways around that. China vessel charges, this is just a kind of a call out to keep in mind as well. This is something where they're talking out there on another 301 investigation where they can impose fees all the way up to $1.5 million on port call for Chinese built vessels or operated by Chinese companies. Really the goal on this is try to grow the US shipbuilding industry. The Chinese shipbuilding industry dominates this field. So we see this as a concern. It's kind of out there. They're supposed to be making recommendations this week. As I said, this is as much as I knew as of yesterday morning. There was some stuff that came out, I think, yesterday afternoon, evening on this. I have not had a chance to absorb that and do any updates. The only thing I think I did see was where I have an item here, 1.5 million per call. That could be on a vessel that comes into the US. It's not a one stop. They go up and down the US. So that could have been 5 stops on the same vessel. So 5 times 1.5. What I did see is it sounds like they just made it a single time, one-time fee, but beyond what that means, what that fee is, what it applies to, I don't know just yet. So I'd have to get a little bit more information on it. Again, a lot of the stuff is for updates on what's going on out in the world to keep in mind for kind of what's going on. Now, trying to get a little bit of a pivot, I'm trying to think how we're doing on time, but for mitigation items that are out there, classification is one of the big items to try to get through. The other item that's out there is kind of hard to avoid some of these tariffs. The one item that is good to do is look at how do you defer what that amount is as much as possible. Foreign trade zones are one of the big items that are out there. You can no longer actually get a lot of the benefits from transitioning this from base material to finished goods and taking the better of those 2 duty rates with a lot of these tariffs. But that being said, the cash flow management aspect in a foreign trade zone is something to really consider, where if you bring it into the foreign trade zone, you don't actually bring it into the US and declare it until it leaves the foreign trade zone. So however long that's in there is good from a cash flow perspective. If it's 3 to 4 months, you actually wait on paying until you bring it out of the foreign trade zone. Typically, when you bring it out, that's closer to when you're actually invoicing your customer base. So that time is pretty good. And if you can wait on paying that until you bill your customer, again, that's a pretty good incentive to take a look at this on foreign trade zones. There is a lot more that goes into this as well, but this is kind of a high level item just to kind of put it out there for people to consider as one of the different tools that are out there. Kind of getting into more of the mitigation. I know looking at it, probably getting a little tight on time, and I want to leave more time for Q&A. But out of this, as we're going through it, fundamentals are more important than ever at this point. HTS classification, country of origin determination, customs valuation. I saw one of the comments that came in on valuation. Quite clearly, the Chinese understand if I devalue my import declaration, I have a lower burden. Well, there are ways that we can talk about that as well. We have that over there on the contract negotiation side with our suppliers. So there are some basics that you can do that are legit, but be very careful. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is not. If you need help coming in and going through your products and assessing what is my classification, have we actually reviewed these for accuracy? We can help with that. Actually came through with one of my other companies, and we were originally looking at their stuff of how does this impact us from steel 232s? Was looking at the classification and I'm like, it actually should be classified somewhere else more accurately. And when we classify it more accurately, it's out of scope, which is good. So it's understanding what those impacts are, what's in, what's out. If you need help doing that, we can help with that. If you need help on reporting requirements, we can help provide some of that guidance as well. One of the other items to think in mind as you're writing your guidance internally is for one of our other clients, they have a best practice where they classify their items with their customer because they manufacture it to the customer's spec. If they're classifying with their customers, we actually wrote that into their internal guidance that they can copy paste that out when they have discussions with their customers. Why are my prices where they are? Why do we have these tariff impacts? It's like, well, as our best practice, we've been classifying this with you. That classification is what determines our tariff burden. So it helps open up that conversation with them. So keep that in mind as we're going through the requirements as well. We can help out with that. If you need help walking through some of the scenario planning, that's been one of the other items. The FTZ, as we kind of mentioned, I think that one is a very good tool that's out there from a cash flow perspective as well to help manage that. Substantial transformation is still in play, but it's just to a lesser degree. Really, that cash flow management is a good one right there. And I know as much as there's a lot of uncertainty that's out there around foreign trade zones, it is a two-step process. So I would say we should have some talks around that if you're interested in exploring that. There are some things that you can do now. We have 90 days. Let's try to take advantage of that 90 days. And then when we're ready to go, we can see about what that might mean from an activation perspective. Like I said, we are looking to do additional webinars very specifically on the contract negotiation in the foreign trade zone. Contract negotiation, one of the other items I would say is there are some exotic things that are out there in the industry for sale and whatnot. For sale is a valid tool. It's pretty long and it is somewhat exotic in that, but I would say fundamentals still come into play on this one as well. If you need help talking with your suppliers, we're happy to assist. It's good to maybe have a third party come in and help kind of manage that if you want. The IOR is important on this as we talk about valid items that are out there for tools, risk versus cost. Who is the importer of record will determine what your value is that's being declared to customs. So there is something that can just be done there on just basic Incoterms and contract negotiation. The other thing I would say is I've had clients in the past where we're looking at their purchase price and it's pretty obvious they haven't looked at what's included in that purchase price. As much as you might have an Incoterm that says that you are buying direct from factory, we're finding it had 301 tariff baked into their purchase price. If you have that in your purchase price, you're now paying additional tariff on top of a tariff. It's a problem as you walk through it, but as we identify those things, if you need help running through identifying things like that, if you need additional horsepower to help do that work, we can help with that. But we are looking to do an additional webinar just very specifically on contract negotiation as well. Mapping that tariff risk, navigating the requirements, and then anything on strategic tariff planning if you need help on that. Kind of hitting the last slide so we can kind of get into the Q&A. I put a couple things up here on clients that we've helped out there. Like I said, just on the tariff classification aspect, 29% savings. It's pretty immediate in this stuff as we go through on classification, what that impact can mean, both internally and externally for people as you're looking at it. The other one in general on contract negotiations as well, we've had negotiations with clients that we've had very good success on savings overall in terms of just logistics transformation, efficiency, scalability, what that might mean. It could be tariff specific, or this could be just as an offset to some of these tariffs as well. A little bit of talk about what our services are down there on the bottom left. I do want to call out, as we kind of said at the very beginning, we have launched a digital export documents platform with the Boulder Chamber. As much as that may not necessarily be direct on the tariffs right now, this tends to be an area that tends to dominate a lot of time for the people that also have to deal with the tariffs. This does streamline a lot of people's day-to-day time managing their export documents. I highly suggest taking a look at that because if this frees up time on your desk and it's one less thing to worry about and you can now focus your time on more of this tariffs and trying to understand what's going on with tariffs, how you can manage the tariffs, it is a good tool to free up time on your desk. With that, kind of take a bit of a pause so we have some time on QA. See if we have anything that came in specifically. Matt, was there any themes that came in on questions that you kind of saw?
I did not see a lot of themes, Eric. We do have a question from an anonymous attendee. We are a manufacturing company in the US, and China makes up to 80% of our customer base. What are some things we can do to mitigate the retaliatory 125% tariff?
Um, I think we would have to get into a little bit more on what that is for that company. Would be happy to actually talk a little bit more in depth on that one on the side. If you want to send a message through either to us or through the Boulder Chamber, let's talk a little bit about what that is, like what your products are, where they're coming from, and we can take a look at it. Some of that stuff, again, like I said, classification is a big one. And then what is the nature of your products? Keep in mind that retaliatory tariff of 125% it's 125% or Section 232. So we should take a little bit more of a deeper dive looking at what those products are and where that might kind of line out in that. And if nothing else, you can get it down from that 125 down to even if it's just 25 because you're in a Section 232. There is something there. And
Eric,
then
Eric, one quick thing. I am also dropping a couple links in the chat. For today's, we have a webinar survey and consultation request link. If you click that, you can basically you can give us some feedback on today's survey. You can request a consultation. We also have another link for the digital export documents in the chat, which is also the same as the QR code that Eric has on his slide. And then for any questions, you can always just reach out to info@boulderchamber.com. Eric, we do have two other questions. One from Peter Jacobson. How is the 20% of content determined?
Um, I would stress kind of look at the same guidance that they've been putting out there on the Section 232. If you have 20% US content, they're going to want from a burden of proof, what is your bill of material or your BOM? How does that stack out? How do you arrive at that 20% content on US content? On an article by article basis, take a look at your bill of material and run through that. If you need some help actually talking through what that kind of clarification is on what customs is looking for, or even trying to dig into that, let us know. We can try to help you out with it. The burden of proof is somewhat difficult though, because I would say you're going to need a costed BOM to actually prove that out.
Another question from Stephen. Are you going to discuss, I'm assuming this is in Colorado terms as they relate to who pays tariffs? Stephen, if you want to clarify that, if I've interpreted that incorrectly, let me know.
Incoterms. I didn't call out the Incoterms in this one here. We could actually do a separate section, even just a lunch and learn on Incoterms, I think. I do agree with Stephen's comment that Incoterms are probably more critical than ever in clarifying who does what. It also tends to be one of those things in companies where your people negotiating purchasing will throw down an Incoterm, but then you really do need to dig into, well, my Incoterm says this, although when you ask what that actually means in practice, it does not reflect the Incoterm. But those are just standard terms that are out there and it defines who does what in the purchasing transaction. But we can see about doing a separate lunch and learn just specifically on that topic. And then I think I was scrolling through, I did see Aaron, thank you. I did see you put down an update on the vessels. Thank you for being ahead of me on that one. I think that is a better synopsis. Like I said, I have not had time prepping for this morning to actually dig into it. But again, I think if people kind of see for that synopsis in there, it's whatever that is that they're charging on these operators, just to understand that's going to be a pass through to people. While it's not a tariff, it's going to be it will be a barrier to entry into the US market that will have to be shared onto anyone on that vessel that is importing cargo off the vessel. You're going to be paying it. While it's not a tariff, it's a transportation charge that just went up on you if you're doing ocean cargo.
We had one other question from Trent asking if this replay is going to be available and how folks can access that. We are recording this. It will be placed on the Chamber's YouTube channel, and we will be pushing out information to both our attendees today and to others to basically access this valuable resource, this webinar, this recording today. So you'll see this on other channels.
So I did see there's a question in there regarding buying steel from a supplier. I get at the high level, if you're just getting additional charges from one of your suppliers, it's going to be tough. You probably don't want to absorb that yourself directly on it. That's something where we can maybe talk through a little bit more. I think both on what contractually do you have in there with that supplier that we can talk through. And then the other thing that maybe take a look at with that supplier is just trying to understand, well, what is that item that you're buying from them? And is it truly 25% of the value of the item? Or are they in one of those derivatives on one of the articles where the reality is maybe it's not 25% and they could be taking advantage to charge you more? And maybe it should be 25% on the content of the steel, which is a lower amount on that. So it's kind of digging into what that means, or helping educate that supplier a little bit on how to actually navigate that a little bit more and try to get that in that category where you bring that down a little bit. And again, details, I think details do help on that. Like I said, feel free to reach out a little bit more. Happy to talk more in depth on that one offline, and see what we can do to assist with that.
Perfect. So folks, again, I'm just going to call everyone's attention to the chat. We do have a couple of links there that are going to be very helpful. We would love to know how we did today on how the performance of today's webinar, how, what information you would like to hear more about for future webinars. Eric mentioned that we are going to try to focus on at least two other webinars for the future. Your responses to that survey will help us shape what future programming looks like. So do interact with that web survey. It'll also be in the resources that we share out for all of our attendees today and beyond that. And then don't forget our digital exports documents are listed there in the chat. They are linked to the Boulder Chamber website, both for certificate of origin, certificate of sales, and GMB certification.
And also, I think on one of the other items coming up, let us know. I think USMCA certification would be a good one to talk about as well for people. Please give us feedback on that. I think that's something that we can either add as like a lunch and learn or a separate webinar in and of itself. Like I said, it's become such a critical item that actually helps get out of some of these tariffs. Is if you do qualify for USMCA, you can get out. But how do you know, do you qualify? How can you validate that you qualify? And doing all of that homework around that. And can you do it fast enough to get it in place? And that tends to be, I think, the biggest thing on a lot of these as well is if you need additional horsepower to try to get this ramped up as quickly as possible. Like I said, we're here to try to help in assisting your in-house teams as well, because I do feel for the in-house teams, it's a lot to deal with right now. So any way that we can help.
Eric, we're at time, so if we have any slides to share, disclaimers to share, let's roll through those and we'll wrap up. And folks, thank you so much for being on the call today. And be on the lookout for more and more resources as we engage the topic of tariffs, supply chain, foreign trade zones, and other related material. Thank you so much. Eric, thank you so much for being on today's call. You did a bang up job. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of positive feedback. So thank you so much for your partnership.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. And then happy to stay engaged. Like I said, if you guys need anything, we will be sending this out with a copy of the slides. You can access the recording itself. And then anything else that you need that you want to hear about, please let us know. I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much.